People believe we are now living in what the Bible calls the end times, a period of great social upheaval and natural disasters. The list includes earthquake, fire, pestilence, wars, and rumors of wars. Modern science seems to confirm the possibility that the ancient warnings regarding natural disasters could indeed materialize. So what exactly are the other signs we have to look forward to if we are in fact in the last days? Let's turn to the book of Revelations. In chapter 13, beginning with verse 16, John speaks of the great beast that will have all power in the last days. He also forced everyone, small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on his right hand or on his forehead, so that no one could buy or sell unless he had the mark, which is the name of the beast, or the number of his name. This calls for wisdom. If anyone has insight, let him calculate the number of the beast, for it is a man's number. His number is 666. What John seems to be describing in considerable detail is a cashless society. Is that a possibility in our lifetime? Credit cards are marvelous things. These little pieces of plastic make it unnecessary to pack large sums of cash or write out dozens of checks. Just swipe it through the card reader and instantly your bill is paid.
Just a generation ago, a personal identification number on a global basis seemed like an inconceivable idea. And yet today, it is not only possible, but it is very near to becoming a stark reality.
We're all familiar with the barcode system for checkout. It's currently in use in practically every retail outlet in our country, as well as most of the technologically advanced countries around the world. But does a technology exist that would make it possible to simply pass the laser reader across the back of your hand or forehead? And what would the laser be reading? Different translations of the Bible disagree, by the way. Some say the mark will be on the hand, others say in the hand or forehead.
The technology not only exists, but it has been tested extensively and successfully. I personally have seen one of these implantable devices. It's a small device about the size of a grain of rice. Interestingly enough, in certain subjects, it had to be removed because it caused a reaction similar to boils. This has some very interesting biblical implications.
There are a number of groups that are promoting the advantages of a cashless society. And the steps between a credit card or debit card and having a mark on your hand or forehead are few indeed. There are very few, in order to buy or sell, especially under pain of death, that would resist receiving such a mark. The fact is, we're a lot closer to being there than most people want to believe. The vast majority, probably upwards of 85% of all transactions, are already cashless transactions. To take it a step further, if all of us were to demand cash instead of journal entries of one kind or another, there'd only be enough cash in existence to cover 5% of the transactions.
Since the advent of computers, many people have tried to discover the identity of this beast with the number 666, but without success. He is usually associated, however, with another of the biblical signs of the times, that great world leader who will be welcomed, adored, worshipped even, but who will eventually become the most vicious and bloody dictator in the history of the world. The man who will be called the Antichrist is prophesied to be of Middle Eastern origin, but he will rule from Rome. This man looms large on the stage of human events during the last days. So far, no one of that stature can be found anywhere on the world scene. Could it be that the ancient prophets simply missed the mark on this one?
Given their record of unblemished accuracy, I wouldn't want to second-guess the prophets, whether it's Daniel or Ezekiel or even Christ himself, because they spoke of a time of great tribulation, a time in which you would have nation rising against nation, of wars and rumors of wars, of great commotion and upheaval, and of pestilence and famine. And they spoke of one other event that I think we're on the verge of seeing fulfilled. The prophets of the Bible foretold of the revival of the ancient Roman Empire in the generation leading up to Christ's return. Both Daniel and John prophesied of the rise of a European and Mediterranean superstate in the last days. And although an entire millennium has passed since the fall of Rome, the prophet Daniel tells us that the Roman Empire will miraculously revive in the form of a powerful 10-nation confederated superstate.
Are the nations of the new European Union beginning to fit Daniel's description?
The BBC interviewed Belgian Foreign Minister Henri Spaak a few years ago about the 1957 Treaty of Rome and what they proposed to accomplish in the European Union.
We felt like Romans on that day. We were consciously recreating the Roman Empire once more.
Point of fact, the Maastricht Treaty that Spaak was talking about forms the world's first superstate. Let's face it, what a colossus, the economy, an allied army, things much larger than the United States. And I think it's going to be an awesome situation that we don't even realize today.
When it comes to accuracy, no one can hold a candle to the biblical prophets. Their record of prophecy is so far unblemished by any failure. Over 400 prophecies regarding the birth and life of the Savior were fulfilled in every respect. And many of us are witness to the fulfillment of prophecy in our own time, the prophecies of Ezekiel being just one example. But then the ancient prophets were judged by a different standard.
In ancient times, men called prophets had only two choices. They either were correct or they were stoned to death. Short-term prophecy was a risky business. You either had to be remarkably accurate or remarkably lucky.
The stage, it seems, has been set. Now the only thing required is for the central character to step into the spotlight. And we should remember the prophets warned that power was given him over all kindred tongues and nations. Is it possible that one man could gain such absolute global power? The prophets provided an answer to that question too.
The answer is in John's revelation about the mark of the beast. Total control over commerce, buying and selling, will bring about total control over every aspect of life, including religion. As for overcoming national sovereignty, the elite who support one world government have already suggested that it only remains for the right crisis to occur for people the world over to accept the notion that we will all be better off under a single worldwide government.
It seems obvious, even to the casual observer, that the increasing power of the United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, the World Trade Organization, and the World Court are rapidly destroying traditional national sovereignty and replacing national political goals with a global economic agenda. Astonishingly, the global elite have admitted that this is their goal. Henry Morgenthau, Treasury Secretary under President Franklin Roosevelt and a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, acknowledged it was their plan to, quote, financially bankrupt the international machine. If you think modern global politicians have softened their stand, consider the UN study recently sponsored by the Ford Foundation. Written by Sir Brian Urquhart and Erskine Childers and published in 1994, this study boldly states that the UN General Assembly, the Security Council, the International Monetary Fund, the World Health Organization, and the International Labor Organization should all be transferred to one central location in order to centralize political control and improve overall efficiency. The study further states that while there is no question at present of the transformation of the UN system into a supranational authority, the organization is in a transitional phase. The study repeatedly uses phrases such as the gradual limitation of sovereignty or chipping away at the edges of traditional sovereignty.
There are those, it seems, who are bent on making the prophecies come true. But are these indeed the signs of the times? Christ was impatient with those who he said could easily read the signs of the weather, but were either unwilling or unable to read the signs that were given them by the prophets. Surprisingly, most people seem concerned not so much with if these things will happen, but when they will happen. 1,000 years ago, many people thought they would be witnesses to the end of the world. Why that was, we're not quite sure. But today, millions of people the world over point to the biblical evidence that seems to point to this generation as the end time. But does the Bible give us conflicting messages about interpreting the signs of the times?
Jesus admonished the Pharisees, the religious leaders of his day, for not understanding and paying attention to the prophetic signs of the coming of the Messiah. He said to them in effect, you understand the signs of the weather, you understand the signs of the seasons, but you've misunderstood the signs of the coming of the Messiah.
Can we be accused of the same thing, or will our global technology help us to get a better read on the people and events that the prophets have fixed as warning signs of the last days. In Matthew chapter 24, Jesus tells his disciples what will happen at the end of the age.
You will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see to it that you are not alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom.
He also warned of other catastrophes.
There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All of these are the beginning of the birth pains.
The message is clear. There will be a series of events of ever-increasing magnitude that we should see as signs of the greatest event of all, his return. And while the earth groans, we can look for society in general to dwindle in unbelief. In 2 Timothy, Paul warns,
There will be terrible times in the last days. People will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boastful, proud, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, without love, unforgiving, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not lovers of the good, treacherous, rash, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having a form of godliness but denying its power. Have nothing to do with them.
700 years before Christ, the prophet Isaiah pointed a finger of warning, and he said, "Woe unto those who call good evil and evil good, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter." Today we are witnessing as never before in history that those who try to follow the teachings of Jesus are being laughed at, mocked, even persecuted. And yet the teaching Jesus said, which are evil, are now being glorified and applauded by the elite. But Isaiah adds another warning. Woe to those who are wise in their own eyes and clever in their own sight.
have we become too wise and clever for our own good? What signs of the times could we be overlooking or perhaps ignoring? More importantly, is there anything we can do about it? In the early 1960s, the United States Supreme Court, through a case brought by Madalyn Murray O'Hair on behalf of her son William Murray, struck down teacher-led school prayer. It further banned all religious expression, including any display of the Ten Commandments, from public schools on the grounds that it violated the First Amendment. Before 1962, polls among educators listed the primary problems in public schools as talking, chewing gum, making noise, running in the halls, getting out of turn in line, wearing improper clothing, and not putting paper in wastebaskets. In just 20 years, 1982, the top public school offenses were rape, robbery, assault, burglary, arson, bombings, murder, suicide, vandalism, extortion, drug and alcohol abuse, gang warfare, pregnancy, abortion, and venereal disease. Today, those problems are not only unabated, they're getting worse. Could it be that the generation described by Paul is now being raised up? And there's more. John the Revelator prophesies of some truly cataclysmic events that will occur shortly after the opening of the seventh seal. The description of these events is so horrific that most of us tend to simply ignore them. But there are signs. According to chapter 8, verse 8 in the book of Revelations, something like a huge mountain, all ablaze, was thrown into the sea. A third of the sea turned into blood, a third of the living creatures in the sea died, and a third of the ships were destroyed. On June 16, 1999, the BBC reported that a newly discovered asteroid, a kilometer in width, was heading toward Earth and would miss by only 1/10 the distance between the Earth and the Moon. It is due to arrive in 2027. Shades of Nostradamus.
Scientists in 1999 discovered an asteroid about a half-mile wide, and researchers at the Smithsonian